Principals. Today I'm talking about what does it mean when our PLCs fall flat. So now what do we do, right? And so thinking of when PLCs are never meant to be another meeting on the calendar, they were designed to help teachers, educators work together, study, learn, and just improve instruction in meaningful ways. But too often you see it falling flat. So here's the real caveat, the paradox, from potential to actual reality. So here we think, on one hand, the potential is very strong. Research practice both tell us when educators are collaborating around evidence, right? They have a shared responsibility and we're growing to support student outcomes and they will improve, right? But on the other hand, the reality of many schools looks quite different. PLCs are often kind of launched with kind of just in time without clear structure, right? And without the leadership support, without sustainability that's necessary. So schools are often asking teachers to collaborate and think deeply without these systems in place. So that causes a little problem. So here's why PLCs kind of stall. So when it stalls, it's kind of not because, educators don't care. It's usually because the conditions around this work makes it very difficult. And think about it being fragmented at times, right? Teachers are pulled in multiple directions, thinking about collaboration, inquiry gets kind of squeezed out by other demands, and then thinking second is the compliance trap, right? These meetings become these check marks. The attendance become, it's here, it's scheduled, not because we're really here to solve these real world problems. And a third, to be honest, there are so many other priorities from test prep, pacing guides, curriculum, just urgent daily issues that arise. And then, of course, the burnout. And so when we think about high turnover and staffing shortages, it's really thinking about the emotional fatigue. And it makes it really hard for our teams to think about what does the consistency look like when PLCs and the consistency that it requires to be successful. To move forward, we have to kind of think, okay, what is happening right now? It may look like maybe informal charts, top-down directives, right? Thinking about, teams looking at data without actually acting on it. It may be great conversations, but there's not any inquiry around it and, proactive action. And then there is instructional adjustment, maybe sometimes, but sometimes not so much, right? But thinking about a true developed PLC, right? It's job embedded. It kind of moves with the cycles. It's grounded in evidence. So we're moving towards a goal. Most importantly, it leads to change, right? And that's instructional change. So that true distinction matters. A PLC is just not meetings. It's disciplined in a way where teachers are working together and they are learning together. So we want to preserve our PLC time, and our goal is to kind of protect the integrity of PLC and the practice. Okay, let's talk about these 4 buckets kind of at the center of a strong PLC. Are these 4 kind of essential questions, right? The questions that keep this work that we're doing actionable. First, what must all students know, right? That, of course, we start with the standard. We need clarity around essential learning, not just a broad painted brush. Second is, how will we know that they have learned it? Like, what is our evidence, right? And how do we share that evidence and look at the student understanding of it? And then a third is, what will we do if they don't get it, right? And that's our intervention, right? This is kind of where teams respond, we reteach, we support students, but we're very intentional about how we do that. And then fourth is, what do we do if students already know it, right? That is the enrichment, right? Every student deserves growth and not just kind of the remediation, which we see happening a lot of the time. So when teams truly stay anchored in these kind of 4 buckets, PLC becomes less about check, we did it, and more about really meeting the needs of our students with clarity and purpose. So now let's talk about the inquiry cycle, right? This cycle that continues to go round and round. These are practical ways to strengthen our PLCs. In short, it's repeatable, right? Step 1 is teach, of course. Teams are delivering that instruction, that meaningful instruction that is tied to the standard. 2 is teachers use kind of formative assessments, gather evidence, meaningful data, kind of they're researchers in this component. Step 3 is kind of we're responding to what we all have identified, or misconceptions or patterns that we see, or kind of gaps in actual student work that we've deemed as evidence. And then step 4 is kind of revisiting this cycle, and then just adjusting based on kind of the collaboration, the turns that we need to make, but its work ties close to the classroom, and it gives teams that structure that is manageable, digestible, and sustainable over time. And it kind of moves away from this isolated teaching and decisions. It becomes a shared problem solution application. All right, so now let's talk about the structures that are necessary to have in place. PLCs just don't happen by accident, right? They are supported by, intentional structures, right? Think first of all is your master schedule. Who's meeting? Can they meet or not, right? So think about that common planning time. If it's not built into the school day and it's not meaningful, then collaboration is secondary, right? And so thinking of the support and protocols, right? The second part is protocols. Our teams need to be focused, whether we know our formats, we know student work, we know discussing instruction is going to happen, and we're always kind of thinking of what's the next steps. And so if we have that protocol that is always there, it's less likely, the conversation is less likely to kind of drift. And then third is what is the non-negotiable, right? And that is our time. Educators' time has to be protected and prevented from interruptions, kind of like announcements, extra events, changing the priority, right? And so when these PLCs matter, the schedule should reflect that time and give our educators that time. So leadership decisions should reflect that this alignment is about our PLCs, and we want to make sure that we're working consistently towards it. So let's talk about other things that need to be in place, right? The kind of non-negotiables, the kind of things that are not said but need to be said. So we're talking about a culture of trust, right? Before any protocol, any schedule, any data, any work, we have to have trust, right? The psychological safety necessary. Teachers are not going to necessarily open up their data, share their challenges, or even take risks on practices they're using in the classroom, right? And remember, this makes sense to have trust in these small spaces, right? People don't grow in environments where they feel kind of like you're going to judge me or expose me, right? We want to make sure our teachers feel supported in every way. So these PLCs build that environment where everybody is seen, supported, valued. There's a healthy culture in the school, or maybe the teacher, you might hear the teacher say, hey, this lesson didn't go the way I hoped. My students are struggling here, and they won't feel any blame or kind of ridiculed in the moment. So to be honest during your PLCs, like that is the foundation of true improvement. So we think that trust it's necessary, and I call it the prerequisite. Okay, so here's some things that PLCs you're having in place in some of the field, right? In some of the schools that I'm watching and observing. So once the structure is in place, you can see PLCs moving as a machine with meaningful work, right? One area unit is design. Teams can maybe co-plan a lesson, maybe learning experiences. We're talking about equitable learning experiences, aligned to standards, and it's high quality instruction. Another maybe is data meeting. Teachers are analyzing formative assessments along the way to try to find what our targets were, right? Design targeted flexible supports for our students. Maybe a third as peer observation. Teachers are visiting other teachers' classroom with a clear focus. The conversation shifts from like this opinionated piece to data and evidence and analytics, right? And then finally there's that action research. We're all professors in a sense. We're all doing the research that's necessary to test strategies around specific problems of practice, and then just discussing the results together, right? This is where these PLCs become these live, living, breathing systems of growth. And then, we're just not only talking about teaching or our day, it's actively improving our practice. So now let's talk about the evidence, right? When PLCs are truly functioning well, they begin to create these meaningful outcomes, right? We see in higher quality pedagogy because when teachers are learning from one another and sharing results, right, we see stronger student achievement, especially over time. Many schools kind of see it in reading instruction when it's more aligned and, more responsive. It definitely reduces isolation. Teachers feel less alone. They feel that they're growing collectively. So, and I think like this really matters for school improvement, not only about these programs that are in place, but, people learning together. That's the key, right? So I know this conversation kind of comes up a lot, like, hey, it just runs on autopilot. But to be honest, like leadership matters. Principal and instructional leaders play a critical role in kind of identifying and monitoring the quality, modeling expectation, protecting these structures in place, and kind of sustaining that culture of trust, right? This doesn't mean kind of leaders take over or dominate the work. It just means that we're kind of stewards of the conditions that allow the work to collaborate and to survive and do well, right? And the leaders protect the time, reinforce the protocols, listen to the needs, and ensure that, the learning stays focused and, not everything is very intentional. I got a wonderful colleague. Terry is doing wonderful work around PLCs. But think about with the question is, are you driving PLCs through true inquiry, right? And so thinking about what does it mean to drive true inquiry when we're talking about our PLCs, right? We're not talking about students. Are they talking about taking action on evidence, right? Are the meetings built around routines, results? Are your structures even supporting student improvement, or just kind of managing our tradition? And so this work is kind of here. It's happening in the schools. And think about, what does an audit mean, right? How can we audit our master schedule to see if our schedule is even conducive to providing people with a similar PLC time, right? But being very reflective as leaders, examining our protocol, and reflecting honestly on what we could do to make it better. So if you want more, DM me. But other than that, I hope you enjoy. Talk to you later. Bye.